IVM.
Welcome to episode 7 of Getting Meta. In this episode, I speak with entrepreneur and I want to say the good guy of the Indian startup scene, Dhimant Parekh. Dhimant is the founder and CEO of The Better India and The Better Home. The former is a website that focuses on highlighting positive news and shining a spotlight on people making a difference around the country, while the latter, The Better Home, is a range of sustainable home cleaning products that was launched during the pandemic and has kind of become sort of like a D2C success. His LinkedIn bio starts with, and I quote, "I love to build useful stuff from scratch." Absolutely love that. When I floated the idea for this show, Getting Meta, on Twitter last year in around late 2020, more than one person wrote in saying that I should definitely have Dhimant on the show. And that turned out to be a very good idea. Dhimant was called by one of those people the most productive person I know. And apart from running these two seemingly different companies, he also has a lot of outside interest: theater, reading, the startup scene in general, quantum physics, interestingly enough, and all in all, great material, great guest material for my humble little show. So what do we talk about in this episode? Dhimant and I talk about a whole lot of things, how one's upbringing and things that happen early in life, how they can really shape values and what one ends up doing in the future, how parallel interests can sort of rub off on each other. And that's a common strain that you'll see in some of my conversations with some of my other guests as well. Then about finding your own style of working, why the most important skill today is the ability to narrate a story, how his companies rather dealt with the pandemic and overcame several odds, and of course, positivity and finding hope in a time like this. Just one thing though, before we start, we did this interview while Dhimant was driving. Well, somebody did warn me that he was super productive. So the audio quality from his end is not exactly studio quality. That being said, I hope the quality of conversation and insight more than makes up for it. I completely forgot that, he was driving till I heard the odd honk and car opening and closing once in a while. And also for those watching this on YouTube, for some reason, this episode does not have video apart from this intro and again the outro that you'll be seeing later. Onwards then to my quite wide-ranging, fascinating, eye-opening chat with Dhimant Parekh. Dhimant, welcome to this show and thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Thank you so much for having me. Really glad.
Awesome. So, Dhimant, the idea of this show really is to inspire listeners and really the host also from the habits, mental models, and worldview of some very, very smart people. The idea is to talk less about the work that you have done. So, I'm sorry we won't be getting into the Better Home or Better India all that much.
Sure.
And it's really going to be talking about you. Hence, the name of the show is Getting Meta. And,
right.
And when I first spoke about the idea of doing the show on Twitter a long time back, a few people had DM'd me saying that I should have you on the show, one calling you the most productive person I know, in quotes. So with that, I am absolutely thrilled to have you on Dhimant. So yeah, I mean, there are, let's begin. There are lots of angles, I guess, that we could dissect things from. And I hope that we do end up jumping all over the place rather than having a straight, Q&A format. But to start things off, Dhimant, I think, I'm of the belief that it's certain incidents or observations during, childhood or early adulthood that really tends to shape a person's worldview and, the path that they eventually pursue, especially those who start something or work in a career path of their choice. So I'm just wondering whether, you had something like this, that kind of something that might have happened to you or something you experienced, both in terms of positivity and sustainability, the two sort of broad themes that I want to explore here. And the reason I ask is for the benefit of anyone listening is I think it's small events or happenings that really compound to shape someone. So what should they look out for? What should they pay attention to? So long first question really, but I hope I managed to get it across.
No, so I think you're spot on in saying that it's basically the influences we've had in our childhood which really shape up our worldview, right? And
Yeah.
as I kind of think about all of that, I think there were multiple factors at play in terms of what led to eventually the kind of things I ended up pursuing, right? And I really go back to, I think, the upbringing that I had. I mean, I was born in Bangalore, went to went to a typical sort of school in Bangalore, where in those days, I think what was really emphasized on a lot was your focus on academics.
Mm-hmm.
So by virtue of which, of course, you end up pursuing only ACADS, right? I'm talking
Right.
about the 80s. And so hardly any exposure to sports. And I went to a school which had hardly any exposure to anything other than academics. And the singular purpose of education back then was to see if you could make it as an engineer. The best case would be you make it to an IIT. And the second best case would be that, hey, you at least become an engineer or a doctor, right? And I think everything was shaped around that. My father was working in a I mean, he had working in an organization. There's no entrepreneurial sort of stint back then. I think the peer group that I had, we were all then we all gravitated towards things like technology and science by virtue of where we went to for school. So I took a fascination for that. Really learned a lot in high school and post that around computers, right? And this was again those early days where you're learning programming languages like Fortran and Pascal and
basic.
Basic, yeah. And Pascal became my sort of a special focus, I would say. I really took to that language, I kind of completely skipped everything that came after that, like C, C++, Java. I know this is getting a little more technical than
this is fascinating.
This
is fascinating, actually. This is the kind of stuff that unpacks everything. Really.
Yeah, so I really took to Pascal, I must say. And in 11th and 12th, built a lot of stuff using that, tinkered a lot with that, and then went to engineering, computer science engineering. And there again, the syllabus also had Pascal back then. I was fascinated by the subjects like digital electronics and programming languages and building stuff, and suddenly here you are in an engineering college where almost everyone has come in with the same sort of analytical bent of mind, very logical sort of thinking and all of that. So that kind of brought out this whole thread around technology and my focus on love for it. Incidentally, when companies come towards your final year to select people, and one of the companies which came in was Honeywell, and turns out that they were looking for someone who was good at Pascal, which majority of the people hadn't heard about it or touched on it. And that kind of led to my first job, where I joined Honeywell, and I was working on Pascal on these large control systems.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a story. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of, that thread stayed, and it led to me getting my first job. So that was the whole technology sort of thread there. And the other thing that also happened was my sort of, so in the family, I've tweeted this thread about my father and his entire streak around being very philanthropic and very giving and very empathetic to most people who didn't have the resources, right? And he himself came from a background where they were quite low on the financial spectrum, right? If you look at it, they started at a pretty much at a low level. So really struggled a lot, starting from having to work on the side to pay for his college bills, and kind of made it all the way to a successful career. But throughout that journey, even when the means were limited, I actually saw him go out of his way to help out people. And these were like small things. These were small things, right? And Bangalore of that time, you didn't have much public transport. You couldn't afford auto rickshaws and stuff. And my dad, who finally graduated to a job which gave him a scooter, and he would actually offer rides to people waiting at bus stops. And back then, buses would come like 45 minutes once, and so on. And then when he graduated to a car, I still remember he would be dropping us kids to school, but there would still be like 2-3 strangers who he would accommodate in the back and drop them on the way. And that was I kind of grew up seeing that, right?
Right.
Even smaller things like in newspapers back then, you would have what is today called crowdfunding. So you would have people putting up requirements of someone needing a surgery, someone needing money to help out their child. and so on. And my dad would always contribute a small amount. He would give me this check, and I would have to go to the post office and drop it. And I think I grew up with that whole, at least witnessing that you could actually start helping people out. You don't need to like wait to amass a lot of wealth to help out. There are a lot of smaller acts of good that you can do while you are on your path of progress, right? And I think that stayed with me. So the whole, I would say the flavor, or the streak of wanting to help out, wanting to be able to be of some service, right, to others, I think that remained. So there's this whole technology thread which was happening because of my academic focus. At house, I was kind of starting to pick up this whole thing around how you could help out people even with limited means. And somewhere I think I also got really fascinated with the world of arts in general. And I think this had a lot to do with the books I was reading. I read a lot during my, I would say, high school all the way till engineering college, just because you had so much time on your hands, right? And unfortunately, I haven't been able to ever go back to that sort of velocity of books. But I think that also shaped a lot of my worldview, and got exposed to a lot of new ways of thinking about it. And this is largely fiction that I read throughout those forming years. And that eventually I kind of stumbled upon the whole performing arts section. And it started with a small play we did in high school, I think in my 12th standard, when that play kind of made it to at a city level contest, and we won. And to me, that was a big revelation that I really liked doing this, acting in a play. So while I finished engineering, I joined a tech company. I also went ahead and got myself trained as a theater artist.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I ended up doing a lot of English theater in Bangalore, and I think I did over 100 shows. Got exposed to a lot more people and their different views of looking at things. Like, for instance, I did a lot of Bengali plays. Not that I speak the language, but I got in touch with people who were doing that. And then suddenly you discover that this whole world of literature in Bengali is like fascinating, right? And coming in from a very the socialist angle of the 70s and the 60s and all these plays written during the time, so much angst, which living in a bubble in Bangalore, you never knew. Like, what are you fighting against, really? I mean, come on, like, write code, make your money and drink beer, right? I mean, that's largely what most, most of the things.
You've just described about 50% of Bangalore right there.
And I mean, sure, that's great, right? I mean, I love doing that as well. But then suddenly here you see that, hey, people are fighting for basic rights. There is so much of other things that are happening, which to be honest, I think until I finished engineering, I joined work, I got exposed to all of this. I really had no sort of, I never really dwelled on these matters. So that opened up a thing to a point where I actually was thinking of doing, quitting my job and doing full-time theater. And so that was, I was pretty serious about it. And then, of course, like a lot of people came and said, there's really no money to make, and how do you kind of survive? And, these are one of those idealistic sort of, the phase that you go through.
Yeah.
And I think I ended up straddling two very sort of seemingly very different worlds of a very analytical technology bent of mind, along with working with people who come in from a completely liberal arts background and exploring the world in a very different way. So I think I really enjoyed that. I think I consider myself grateful that I got exposed to both these worlds in a fairly certain amount of depth.
And,
so long winding answer, man. But
it's fascinating. I honestly didn't feel like a long winding answer at all. I was just completely enjoying the journey. And I think a lot of people who end up listening to that, I think they'll be very nostalgic about 80s and early 90s Bangalore, the way you had sort of described. And there's so much to unpack just there itself. Like the whole dichotomy of programming and that on one side, and then arts on the other side, and it's a combination that you typically don't find. You usually just get into one circle completely, and your entire friend circle, professional circle, everything's over there. And I think it's increasingly important to look outside your bubble in many ways. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is that, since you brought it up, I've noticed that people who have taken an interest in programming, not because it's goes along with the flow and you end up working for one of the big IT firms, they generally tend to have a more structured way of thinking. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed C++ when I was in 11th and 12th, and to me, I think in a weird sort of way, my love for just writing structured code, not necessarily writing great code, but just writing structured code, made me a better writer in some ways. Or just made me a little more organized. I was very, very anal about, formatting. And I think I got my love for formatting because I couldn't stand poorly formatted code more than anything else. I don't know. I think it's just an observation that I've had over a period. You think that's true? Like, the people who take to programming in some ways early in their career out of interest, does that have a bearing somewhere down the line as well, even if they don't necessarily get into computers later?
I think it does. I think it brings this whole idea of problem solving at a very core level. And I think that's happened to me as well. I wasn't a great programmer, but definitely, right? Because these languages, at least back then, force you to think around. Like, if you're talking about object-oriented, programming, you're starting to think in those structures, that what's a class and what's an object, and how do these functions interact with each other and all of that. But if you abstract it all, I think it drives the urge inside you to at least think of problem solving at almost every level, right? And I think that stays throughout, and I think it's definitely beneficial, no matter what field you go in.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree that. And really, I thoroughly enjoyed that answer. I almost forgot there. I had to get to the next thing. But you're right. So many of our experiences in childhood can really shape who we end up becoming. And for what it's worth, I spent a little bit of time in the theater as well. Not so much on stage, but I used to handle the lights, and it's something I was very passionate about. This college that I studied at in Micah, we had a long-standing theater culture, and even that, just being part of a team. And I think one thing that I got out of theater was how everybody has a sort of role to play. If you like the lighting, for instance, is not just about illuminating the entire stage. It's about you are part of the story yourself. The
Absolutely.
Way in which, the difference between a few microseconds of fade speed can just alter the way that scene has been told. And I find things like that absolutely fascinating, and it's made me observe the world around in a slightly slightly differently. All right, Dhimant, just moving ahead a little bit, and I think this is a good segue from where we left off. So you're a person who's into a whole lot of things, obviously. I mean, just the fact that you spoke about theater right now, and I find that very interesting. So apart from this, of course, you also run a media platform and a new D2C product, which must be extraordinarily difficult by itself individually. Forget the fact that you're doing it together and you have a lot of other interests. You're an avid reader. Your tweets are meticulously crafted and well thought out. You're a huge quantum physics nerd, which we'll come back to later. There's multiple things there. So first, one, have I missed something out? And two, how do you maintain a balance? And a follow-up to that is really, how important is it to professionally have interests outside of formal working hours?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers there, right?
Yeah.
To me, right, personally, like, if I think from the outside world, it might look like, okay, that's a lot of we're straddling so many things. We run a media platform in the Better India. We have now a D2C in the Better Home and all. But I think it boils down, for me at least, it kind of boils down to what am I really passionate about, and these are areas that I'm really passionate about. So it doesn't seem like it's a lot of stuff on my plate. It seems like, hey, this is fun. We are building something which is having such a large impact on people, and that to me is very gratifying. And so every day is like, let's do this, right? I mean, these are challenges. We need to kind of fix these things, but it doesn't seem like work. I think it's similar to, if you ask me to go to the gym every day, that will seem like work for me. because I can't, I'm not passionate about it,
Mhm.
right? And so then you have to, then that's when you go in this territory of, oh, I need to earmark an hour every day
Right.
to kind of do this, and then you find excuses and so on, right? For instance, running, like I do long distance running.
Mhm.
I love it. And so it never feels like it's a burden, or like you'll never hear me say, hey, I don't have time, so I'm not able to go for a run. Like I'll always find time. And I think that's the key. If you're able to kind of figure out what you're so passionate about, I don't think it'll ever feel like work to you. What feels like work to others and what doesn't feel like work to you, I think that's your sweet spot, really.
Yeah,
And that's where you scale.
Yeah, that's important, right? On the outside, it might look like it's work, but it really doesn't. And if you're passionate about Excel, then so be it. And then you've just made, then you just, you build a career out of what might be laborious to other
Others.
people. But even then, Dhimant, like me, for instance, and this is something I struggle with myself. I do have a lot of interest myself. I'm passionate about a lot of things, and I just find it difficult to have time for everything, even that I'm passionate about, let alone the things that I'm not passionate about, which I still might have to do. So even in a situation like that, I understand that you have a job that you're very passionate about. You're building something that you're very passionate about. At the same time, there are 4 or 5 other things that you are still very, very keen on. So even in a situation like that, which is a great problem to have, is better than somebody who is doing a lot of things that they're not passionate about at all. But even then, how do you end up balancing that time? Like, do you make time out separately?
No, so look, I mean, there are trade-offs, of course, right? For instance, there are certain areas of interest that I do have, and I would love to go deeper into those, but I can't because there's limited time in respect to the work we do. Then, there's family time, and there is the various interests and stuff. So I think there are trade-offs, and over the years, I've realized that you can pick and choose maybe a few things, but you can then defer a few things and say, to get back to that later when I'm kind of done with this. I'm not a very well organized person, to be honest. I'm
Really?
not. I don't think so I wouldn't be able to say, hey, every day from a very disciplined way, say, okay, I'm going to allocate half an hour, go deep into this, go deep into this. I think I'm more of I tend to go deep into subjects that I'm truly passionate about. And I think that is what has led to me being able to do what I do.
Sure.
But I wouldn't say, I think there are trade-offs. For instance, like quantum physics, for instance. I love the subject. I spent a lot of time researching and learning earlier. And I don't get enough time now to even know what's like. So what you end up doing is just reading, on forums like Hacker News and stuff where you do see every now and then what are the latest things that are happening. And so you kind of just stay abreast with it. But yes, you're not able to go kind of deep into it because, you already have so many other things. But I think we end up as human beings, I think we end up prioritizing what we like eventually. That's what you end up spending your time on. Whether your work demands it or not is of course secondary, but you end up gravitating towards those things eventually, right? And I think that's what I've ended up doing.
Yeah, I think one very important thing that you said is the fact that you're not organized, that you've realized it. I think what ends up happening is a lot of people who might be like you in the sense that they maybe thrive on chaos and they can't work with the regiment to schedule, whereas there are other people possibly like me who are anal about Google Calendar and it has to, I can't go to sleep without knowing what my visibility on the next day is like. That might, that for instance might give you palpitations, for instance. But the question that I'm driving towards is, how does one figure out, which is what? What if an unorganized person tries very hard to try to organize his life to a fault, and then it all falls apart because that's what society says that it should be, or that's the best practices that they've read somewhere. Any tips around that? Any tips around how to find your working style, as it were, or even your living style?
I think that every person is kind of wired very differently, and the more you kind of go against the grain, the more uncomfortable you will be, and the less, let's say, for lack of a better word, the less efficient you will be, right? You get onto Twitter and you look at all these threads which talk about, hey, how I made a to-do list and managed to do so many things in a day, and there are so many people like that, right? And I think it's fair, but one has to be aware that it works for a certain kind of a person. To me, if I start doing everything according to a to-do list, I would get bored. And I know, and I mean, I can sense that I'm getting bored. I don't like process driven schedules.
Right.
It doesn't bring me joy. And I think just acknowledging that is very important. And,
Yeah.
and then you have to figure out a way to navigate around those. I wouldn't call it a limitation at all. I think there are people who do really well being a generalist and have multiple interests and kind of, are able to be able to do different things at different points in time. And there are people who just love that, hey, I'm going to go deep into this topic and I need like a week off just kind of working only on this. I won't be able to do that part. Right? I really get bored. For me, what keeps me going is really thinking about newer stuff across sectors. I think you can find your advantages in no matter what model you use, right? No matter how you're wired. But I think it's important for you to start sensing what makes you uncomfortable.
Right.
If a very great productivity hack is touted by so many people, but if it makes you uncomfortable, I think you should just let it go. It's fine. It just means that a certain playbook works for a certain kind of people. Like the Pomodoro Technique, right?
Yeah.
Like people say, hey, put a clock in front of you, 40 minutes or 20 minutes, you're only working on this. And then you break and then you kind of do something else. It didn't work for me. And I tried really hard, but it didn't work for me. And I've realized that maybe there's another advantage to this lack of productivity tools that I have. And I have seen this, that where I have managed to do a better job is that because I like things to be a little more, I would say, chaotic, I've been able to learn parallels from completely unrelated sectors and bring those learnings into sectors that I'm working on. And I've seen magic happen. But if I was totally focused on the sector I'm in, I don't think I would have been able to bring those learnings here and would have potentially lost out on a lot of nice things that we've done. So, I think just be cognizant. I mean, what makes you uncomfortable, and be aware that it's fine and it's perfectly fine to not go down the way, most people are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. The more I speak to people on this topic, I am realizing it's less about prescription and more about just asking the right questions of yourself and, then figuring out your own path in many ways. Just like how you said. And it's interesting to end it with that because that's exactly where I wanted to go to, next, is that you have so many different interests. I was keen to see whether they had rub-offs on each other. Like, for example, did you ever have something from theater that inspired something at work, or the other way around, or something that you read about in quantum physics, for instance, which inspired something else? You mentioned that. So do you have an example of how that's worked out for you?
Yeah, for instance, until I pursued theater for like 5-6 years, and just like before that, right, while growing up in school and engineering, I was pretty much a geek and a nerd, right? And I would really struggle to have conversations outside my circle of friends, and which is, which I think the most essential skill, I think, in today's world is the ability to narrate a story, right? Because I think that trumps everything else.
Yeah.
And when I went into theater and I got trained, and I suddenly realized that there is such a wonderful way to communicate things and to articulate things. I think articulation is fundamentally a huge problem for almost all of us who go to school in India, right? We are not taught about it. We are just taught about the final answers. And we struggle to narrate how we got there. But we get there, right? We're phenomenally good at getting the answers out. But to articulate that story is not taught, at least, not during my time, at least. So I think theater really taught me how to articulate things well, how to communicate with people. And like I said, that whole understanding that everybody has very, very drastically different worldviews from yours. And that's how the world is. I think that helped immensely when I started my own venture, when I would go and speak to, potential clients or speak to potential investors. It all really boils down to what's the story, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you selling? And if I didn't have that, I don't think, we would have come till here. So if not for that sort of theater training course and then the subsequent 5-6 years of working with people in the entire arts world, I don't think I would have been able to, I don't think the better idea would have been here, or at least my ability to have grown it here wouldn't have been where it is today. So that's one very clear rub-off effect that has happened from two very disparate worlds, I could say.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I remember you had referenced this in a recent tweet of yours as well, which actually we will talk about in a short while. We're going to take a short break over here, and then we'll be back for my conversation with Dhimant.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On a show about crypto, Rohan Joshi talks to blockchain lawyer Varun Sethi, who busts myths about the illegality of crypto in India. On our new show, The Longest Constitution, hosted by Priya Mirza, we look at what it actually has to say about things we come across in our daily lives. In our first episode, we touch upon adultery laws and why they treat men and women differently. Bollywood's ace producer Madhu Mantana opens up to Sid about Indian cinema's biggest project Ramayan on Candid Kanan. On Agla Station Adulthood, Siddharth Sangai talked about the state of organic farming in India. And on Getting Meta, a chat with Pallavi from HRX on fitness and battling depression. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. That's really helpful for us. And finally, we'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Fiat Cred, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, and CoinSwitch Kuber. We really do appreciate the support.
All right, and now back to my conversation with the Better India's Dhimant Parekh. But for now, I want to now finally ask a question which I've been meaning to ask for a very long time, which is your fascination with quantum physics. So what is it in short for people, including perhaps your host, who might not know exactly what it is, and why should we really be paying attention to this instead of the trending topics du jour like AI or cryptocurrency or Robinhood and things like that? So how is quantum physics likely to why should we be paying attention to it, and why does it fascinate you so much?
Look, I mean, we all, when you're exposed to physics, right? Yeah. And it's the classic Newtonian physics that is taught to us, and that's pretty much what we all end up remembering, which is a force is applied on a body, and a body either moves or stays at rest, and all of those what are deemed as fundamental laws of physics, right? In a classical sense, right? Yeah. I think that's great, and I think that started explaining why the world behaves the way it does. But when I kind of stumbled upon, let's say, quantum mechanics, and what is quantum mechanics? It's actually nothing but it's a theory, right? It's another theory in physics, which is used to describe the properties of nature at a subatomic level. So you're talking about atoms, you're talking about quarks, you're talking about completely subatomic particles. And this quantum physics, why is it important? Because I was just fascinated by the fact that the entire universe is actually just built upon these things. Mm-hmm. Everything else is a manifestation of how we look at things, right? But at a fundamental core nature, it's all of these things, these subatomic particles that are making us up. Like it's making you and me up. It's making the planet. It's making the universe, the galaxies, and all of that stuff. And I was like, wow, these are the true building blocks. And to me, going inward into that field is just fascinating because, let's face it, this is what we are all made up of, right? And which is why I was just fascinated by it. And then I read up a lot around. There's a whole bunch of books. I still listen to podcasts around this topic. And I think everybody needs to really appreciate the beauty of how profound quantum mechanics and quantum physics is. It's really the study of all of our existence. And
that's amazing. That's fascinating. Any recommendations for websites, podcasts, books for somebody who just wants to just understand at least to the level why to at least understand why you are as fascinated with this as you are, if not get fully geeked out into it?
Yeah, I think so. My introduction from a popular science book perspective was this book called The Dancing Woolly Masters.
Okay.
Right. So The Dancing Woolly Masters is a book by this guy called Gary Zukov. And of course, it was released a long time back. So a lot of changes have happened in our understanding of quantum theory. But it's a great sort of an introductory book. The interesting part is Gary himself is not a physicist.
I see.
Right? And he was actually trying to make sense of what is all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he writes this thing called the Dancing Woolly Masters, which is based on so China has these woolly masters. They teach complex subjects through the form of dance. And their theory is that the entire universe is dancing. You can, of course, kind of quantize it and say everything is a string theory and it's all about vibrations of waves. But all the way to where the Chinese teachers have it, they call themselves as the Dancing Woolly Masters. And if you want to understand the universe, you need to dance with it. And that's the premise of the title of the book.
Amazing.
And like I said, Gary wasn't a physicist, but he really tried to make sense of what is this all about. And he gets into all the experiments around physics which have started showing this very curious anomaly, which is the fundamental anomaly is that of light, right? Light is both a wave and a particle. That's such a complex thing, and such a beautiful thing to appreciate at the same time, that it's not only a light, but it's also a set of particles, and it's both. So it performs as a wave, it also performs discretely as particles. And how do you even make sense of all of this, right? So that's the first book I would recommend, even though some of the topics have been kind of seen different developments. The other book which I would then strongly recommend is basically all the works of Brian Greene. Big fan of how he articulates things around quantum physics. And I would also recommend this podcast by another one of my favorite theoretical physicists called Sean Carroll. So Sean Carroll has this podcast called Mindscape. Sean, of course, kind of doesn't just stick to quantum physics. He also gets a lot of other experts from other areas of interest. But overall, even his books, especially The Arrow of Time, is a very interesting book that people could read. And these are, by the way, these don't require you to have like an advanced degree of physics or anything. It's made for people like, you and me, trying to really make sense of things in an easy to understand language. So Brian Greene, Sean Carroll, and Gary Zukov's, the introductory book, and I think he wrote this in almost in like 1980 or something. It was strongly recommend these to start with.
Great. I think these are terrific places to start with, and of course you have a couple of threads on this topic yourself, which I'll link out in the notes of this episode. And it's kind of interesting that is just a side observation. You mentioned that Gary wasn't a physicist himself, but often I have found that it's sometimes the least qualified people who sometimes do the best job of actually explaining some of these things. And always think of Harsha Bogle and cricket, for instance, and non-experts, as it were. It shows that you don't necessarily need to be a chef in order to critique food in some sense. Great. Thanks, Dhimant. I want to move on to a couple of other things as well. I want to now slowly talk about the professional side of things. And this is something that I grapple with myself. And as somebody like you who's successful and visible, I'm guessing you get a lot of questions for help, advice, annoying people asking you to come on their podcast and things like that. And one of the things that I keep getting asked, for instance, is whether I can do mentorship and take sessions for people and things. And because of time commitments, I just can't. So but I deeply wish I could help them out, and I just wish there was some way that I could do something that would help help them out at least 60-70% of the way. So I'm not at least I'm able to do that. So is there something that you would recommend over here, or something that you've done? And basically what I'm asking is, how can you be maximum helpful in a minimum amount of time is really what I'm getting to.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I personally have benefited a lot by talking to people, talking to other entrepreneurs, talking to people from different backgrounds, and trying to get their view and helping them solve some of the challenges I keep facing. So I think mentorship is important, but what is equally important is to take all the inputs that you get with a pinch of salt, right? Because everyone's journey is very different.
Right.
And I think a lot of us don't realize that almost everyone's journey is influenced a lot by external factors that took place during their journey.
Right.
For which they had no control over, right? And to just go back in hindsight and say, hey, this is how the playbook worked for this person, and hence I will adopt it. I think that's a big mistake we all make. So I think it's important to know your framework very well. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What is the problem you need to solve? And then seek out the right kind of people who have probably faced similar issues or have done something similar, and then take their inputs, but again, don't follow them blindly. Try and see what all can be mapped to your situation and what can't, because everyone has lived their journey in a, so to speak, a different era than you. And that different era could be a month ago. And a month ago, things would have been very different from what it is today. So, a lot of people do reach out and say, I don't know what I should do next. And for that, I really don't have an answer, right? But all I could say is that, this is what worked for me. I tried out a few of these things. I found where my interest lay, and then I went deeper into this and so on. And I think I try and usually leave it at that this is what worked for me. And if there is any value you see in this, feel free to take it. But I'm usually very wary of giving advice. I don't think that is ever applicable in its entirety.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I guess it's also about the person who's asking the question. The more specific they are, the easier it is to guide them, rather than saying, "Oh, okay, I'm just stuck in, I'm just generic stuck. What do I do?" If the more specific they are, the better it is. And I guess that's something that applies to everything.
Yeah, and I love to help out entrepreneurs for the simple reason that when I started off, I don't think I got a lot of that help.
Yeah.
Especially in the early days. And it was more about, you would go meet people who were very successful in their spaces or had built some great stuff. And it would always be very generic, right? Their answers and stuff.
Yeah.
And no one was going to sit down with you and handhold you through and help you navigate through your problems. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So as much as possible, I try and sit down with entrepreneurs, and I think I end up giving more on the meta level in terms of how you should really think about your problems, because I will not have the solutions. Like I don't have solutions for challenges that I face myself. But is there a way in which I can help them navigate? I love doing that.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to asking the right, helping people ask the right questions again, rather than it's interesting how that has remained a strain throughout this conversation. All right, the next thing is I love how a lot of the advice that you have given, be it on Twitter, be it on Medium, be it on the other articles that you've read, when I'm reading them, it's like the advice that you are giving it from a business context, or you're giving your observations from a business context. But what I've also seen is that the same thing can sort of work for individuals. Like I was reading one of the pieces that you wrote. I think it was in your story, where one of the pieces that you wrote last year was use this time to build your offering. And you meant that from a business context, but I think that might also be very relevant for people who may be confused about what to do right now, and especially since this last year has shaken up people's formal relationship with work, and in my opinion, that's for the better. In this period of flux, what do you think people, especially those who are starting their careers or in the first few years of the careers, should be doing?
Okay, so for me, if you ask me the question, what should people starting in their careers keep doing? I think they should basically grab everything that comes their way, especially when you're starting off, right? If you're just out of college, and I don't think you should analyze or overanalyze in terms of where is this gonna take me, or all of that. But I think you should just grab whatever comes your way, and then start understanding for yourself, what is it that's delighting you? What is it that's not comfortable for you? What is it that really makes use of your skill very well, and what aligns with your personality? I think the more you grab, the more data points you will get to understand yourself better, right? And I would say that kind of holds good no matter what situation. When just try and do as much as you can, put yourself out there, make it clear to people that you're available and you're willing to try out a lot of new things, even seemingly impossible things, at least giving it a shot. I think that's very, very crucial. I think you should also, there was this whole time during the pandemic, right? And a lot of things went haywire. But in that article specifically, what I said is that, well, if it's possible, use that time to really build your own self, right? And in the business context, it's like build your next offering. So really take that time off and focus on what is it that you always wanted to do and you didn't have the time to do, and use this pandemic sort of system downtime to focus on that. And then I think it becomes very important to be aware of what is it that you can control. There are many things which are actually out of our control. There are a lot of external factors that come in. So I think it's important to strip down all of that and just look at the fundamentals and look at it and say, okay, what in my life can I control? Can I control where I go to work? Can I control where I stay? Can I control what I eat? All of that, right? And I think it's possible when you strip off everything else. And I think that all of this coupled with fast decision making, right? Like really going with what is exciting for you, having a very optimistic view around things, and grabbing everything. I think it just sets you up in a much better position, purely because you get a lot more inputs back as compared to what you would have got if you were just doing one track at a time. Again, this is coming from a person who prefers to do a lot of things in parallel. So you have to again take this also with a pinch of salt, right? And because again, what is your DNA and what goes against your grain is very important to be aware of. But I think for me, these are the things that really help always bring back some focus.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And one of the things I've always believed is that the first job out of college is highly overrated, and it's just a matter of doing a lot of things and figuring out stuff along the way. So whenever somebody asks me, all right, like when they overly worry about which job to get into, like don't worry about it, just jump into it, and make all the mistakes you can in your first couple of years, and then figure stuff out along the way. I think what you're saying sort of fits in nicely with that perspective and that worldview, I guess.
Yeah.
So speaking of COVID, I'm keen to know how you dealt with COVID and the incidents of last year. In the sense that it was obviously well documented, and you documented it quite well in terms of how the company, the Better Home, did amazingly well. And by the way, congratulations on not just that, but also reaching a point where you are actually able to lower the price of the product for everybody. As we speak, my 2 5-liter cans are on their way, because
Nice.
I guess I'm that sort, I guess, that just likes to have one big can around rather than a subscription
Wonderful.
box. But that's just me, I suppose. But what I'm keen to ask, Dhimant, really is, how did it affect you? Like how, like I'm sure the whole thing was stressful. How did you cope with the whole uncertainty of the thing? And what are the things that you personally took away from this that you think made you stronger?
So firstly, thanks for buying our products. That's helpful.
Always a fan,
Thank
by the
you.
way. Always a fan from the. I was a fan before the product even.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I would say COVID was very hard hitting when all of that happened, and we were in the middle of doing so many things, and suddenly it was very chaotic. We had to. There were just too many variables, I would say. Right? Just too many variables, because we were in the middle of launching a brand, which was the Better Home. We had started a marketplace before that, which we were struggling with in terms of getting scale. And then there's the Better India, right? It had its own sort of dynamics. Yeah. And suddenly you hit with this. And it's not just the business as well. I think personally also we were, I think we were really scared in terms of what's going to happen and how things going to shape up and what are we going to do and how are we going to, suddenly you have this office of 60 odd people, and then now everyone's remote, and how are we even going to coordinate and all of that. So I think the first couple of weeks were completely chaotic in my head and trying to figure out. But what we sat down and did was we said, okay, fine, let's just go back to the basics. And that's really where we said that, okay, the Better India, for instance, was going to take a hit from advertising revenues, because everyone was uncertain, right? Yeah. So nobody was spending money on advertising and marketing and stuff like that. So we knew that, okay, fine, that's going to take a hit. And I basically just removed that out of my sort of list of things that I review, and said, it's no point really for the next quarter to kind of look at this. So let's keep that aside. Then we went back to the Better Home, and we had already invested in a lot of inventory that we had got into our warehouses. And then there was this lockdown. So we were not able to take orders. So we said, okay, fine, we will not take orders around this. So anything that was physical, we were not going to do. And we noticed that this was the era, this was the point where suddenly Zoom calls were the flavor of the, months, right?
Yeah.
And we actually, we have this whole sustainability section on TBI. Yeah. And we said, hey, what we could do in the interim to keep things going is we could conduct online workshop around sustainability. And we actually conceptualized those, and very quickly were able to execute and create these workshops, which people actually paid for, showed up, loved it. And we started doing these almost every other day. So we did workshops for kids around composting. We did workshops around rainwater harvesting, around growing vegetables in your garden, and all of that stuff. So the core is that we had to quickly find an alternative to keep things humming while we waited to know what was going to happen post the lockdown, right? Then the lockdown started lifting, and we then started exploring, should we open up our warehouses? And I think there was this whole part where they said essentials and home cleaners came under essentials. Yeah. So that was a sort of a relief, and we were able to then open up, and we started seeing sales happen. And I think a lot of these decisions were, I think, largely influenced by what constraints we had, what was our business model, and we were trying to navigate through the constraint of external factors, such as you can't ship physically, you can't meet people physically. So what are the things that we, and so quickly these sort of smaller solutions emerged, and I think that's what kept us going until we restarted the main business of the Better Home. So I think that's what it is. But if you ask me, Deepak, your larger question is what was your key sort of learning right out of this? I think this realization was always there at the back of your mind. I think all of us know, but this really cemented it, was that majority of the things that you do in your life are really not in your control. You know? And I think it's important to be cognizant of that whole quote, right? The best laid plans of mice and men. And I think that's so true. And I think it's important at one point to stop taking yourself so seriously and understand and acknowledge that many things will happen which will be out of your control. The only thing you can do is how you react to those situations. And it's perfectly fine to not come out as on tops every single time. It's perfectly fine. Be okay with that. I think that was really my sort of takeaway from this whole thing. So no business learning there, but more about that. I think we need to be aware that there's only so much influence we exert on everything.
It's sobering more than it's sobering more than anything, right? It's sort of like a wake-up call. Now you had the time to reflect on so many things. All right, Dhimant, just into the last couple of things that I want to talk about, and one of the things that I'm very keen on asking is about positivity. And I asked this at a time because, all right, so a couple of things, right? So one, I love your Twitter feed. One, because it shows to me the positive side of the platform in a day and age where Twitter means so much else, right? And in fact, I love your Twitter feed so much that it was only yesterday that I actually realized I hadn't followed you. And the reason for that is I always used to go to your account directly, right? So I always used to, it never showed up on my feed. I would always go to your feed and make it a point to see, okay, what did Dhimant post today? And only yesterday I realized, oh, holy shit, I'm not actually following the guy because, you hardly ever go to a profile, right? It just shows up. It just shows up on the feed. If I could just rewind to something that you had done a very long time back, the first blog post that you ever wrote on your Medium, a grand 8 years ago, it starts almost prophetically with these words. We were exasperated by reading the daily news in India that was largely negative and sensational in nature. And that was 2013. Compared to now, that was just friendly banter exchanged across beer in a Bangalore bar. So how has your outlook towards positivity and positive news and just staying positive changed in a day and age where it's becoming more and more difficult to do so, given everything that's happening around us, COVID, politics, all the other things?
If anything, I think idea has got further cemented in my head that the world needs something like this to balance out everything else. If nobody is going to talk about, or if nobody is going to celebrate all the progressive acts, then we are really building a world bereft of anything to look forward to. So now more than ever, much more than 8 years ago, I think it's all the more critical that there needs to be a platform like this, which is putting a spotlight on the people making a difference. And I think by virtue of doing this, over the many years, what has been amazingly gratifying for me personally is the kind of impact that we've driven on the ground, right? All the way from helping urban slum schools get funded, helping farmers come out of poverty, bringing water and sanitation in villages, and all of this, I think, has been led by the community that reads us. And which gives me a lot more hope that whatever hate and all of that stuff that you see, I think that's a small sliver of what humanity in general is. And I am even more optimistic now after having seen the kind of change that people have brought about since we started. So I think it's super critical. I think the world needs a lot more of these platforms. I think we are today very disproportionately throwing a spotlight on people who do the bad stuff. And that's just not good for society. See, the way I think about this, Deepak, is that, when you bombard people with sensationalism or with what quote unquote negative news, right? And if you constantly do that without giving way forward, then what happens is that people become immune to it. And eventually people decide to stay away from any conversations around it. Right. And that is terrible for democracy. What I think needs to be done is that there has to be a healthy balance of a solutions-oriented journalism And of course, the journalism that has been there, all these decades. I think both play an equal sort of a role. We at the Better India don't kind of take this approach that, hey, the world is great and let's look at it from rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
I don't think that's not our approach, right?
Yeah.
We fundamentally believe that there are two ways to bring about change.
Right.
What traditional media has done is adopt the top-down approach, where you talk about what's broken, so that only if, of course, if you talk what's broken, you know what to go fix, right? So it's a very crucial pillar, right, in terms of what it does in society.
Yeah.
And so the way they go about is that, hey, can you expose something wrong with the authority, a lack of governance, all of that, right? They kind of constantly do that. And the hope is that that leads to change. And then that change will trickle down to the citizens and it will make the place better. And I think that's a very strong approach and a much needed approach.
Yeah.
What was lacking until we came in is a bottom-up approach of change, where we basically said that we will inspire citizens enough and give them access to information that they will go and make a difference despite the authority, right? And that's how I think the whole bottom-up approach of change is what the Better India kind of started bringing in. And we wanted to balance that spectrum out. That until we came in, it was heavily skewed towards that top-down approach. But we believe that both need to coexist in society. And so this is what we're trying to really be propping up, over the many, many years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's just hearing your answer, honestly, just lowered my overall BP for the day, I think, and that was fantastic. Dhimant, that's really about it. Thank you so much for this. This is a wealth of. It was a pleasure and privilege to be on the other side of this conversation. I want to end with two. I mean, it's not a question really. I just want to end with two quotes. One that you made and one that was attributed to you, which I couldn't verify. And both are from Quora. One is somebody had asked, what are your favorite quotes? And somebody has said, it's a quote by Dhimant, which is, it's okay to be average, but never to be mean, which I thought was a lovely way of looking at it. And the second is not a quote per se, but a lovely answer that you gave someone, which I think kind of sums up your worldview nicely. Somebody had asked, should we be subscribing to cable TV office to let our team watch sports? And you said, yes, you want to make your team love working with you. Don't you? And this was way back in 2013. I think things might have turned out very, very well for you since then. So, I can't think of a better advertisement for the person that you are. Dhimant, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This means a lot. And I think this has definitely been one of the most eye-opening chats that I have ever had.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It was a pleasure being on this episode. And I think it was really a world of difference from just talking about business all the time. So I was really glad that you picked this topic and structured it this way. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me.
Hence, I call it getting meta, where we don't talk about the business per se. Hopefully, another business podcast another time where we'll get back to talking about EBITDA and DCF method and things like that. Dhimant, thank you so much, and wishing you and the better anything that comes after that, all the best in the future as well. And I'm looking forward to my 5 liters arriving soon.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Dhimant. I'm just logging off now. Okay, bye.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I absolutely loved, being on the other side of that. And I'm sure you forgot all about the sound issues that I mentioned right up top. And, I honestly, if it weren't for the fact that Dhimant had another meeting scheduled, I would have probably gone on talking to him for a while more. As always, I like to put some takeaways at the end of each episode, and I have some 3 crisp things over here which Dhimant said. One, and all of these are quotes: what feels like work to others and doesn't seem like work to you, that's your sweet spot, and that's where you can potentially scale. So that was very nice. Second thing, when you're starting your career, grab everything and get as many data points as possible. Don't over-analyze. Paraphrasing that slightly, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And last is that quote which, he didn't say he said, but he didn't deny it. So I'm going to use it anyway because I think it's a great way to end. It's okay to be average, but never to be mean. And I think all of us, I think a lot of the world right now could really live by that. Awesome. That's the end of it. Thank you for joining me on this show. All references made in the show are in the show notes. The article that Dhimant wrote, the book he recommends, and even an article that I wrote about the better home in 2020, which is when I was introduced to Dhimant for the first time. So do check that out. All those are in the show notes, and all the other things that he recommended with respect to quantum physics, etc., are also over there. That's a wrap for this week, and see you next week for episode 8 of Getting Meta. See you.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, host of the Empowering Series podcast on the IVM network. I happen to be a peak performance coach and leadership coach by profession, and I'm here to share with you productivity tools, life-altering techniques, and real-life hacks to help you achieve your maximum potential in everything you do, your relationships, professions, careers. So tune in every Monday to unleash your inner power. Be safe, be well, be empowered.